And if you'd bring the rest of the lights down and open up that PowerPoint, it's entitled The Last Supper. This is someone else's message tonight, and it's just going to last just a moment, and I hope to impress upon your mind and plant in your memory something that'll be with you forever. Not everything sticks in my mind anymore, but I remember having presented this at a church. Maybe the last time I presented, I've done this particular kind of presentation, but not in the same way as tonight. Someone said, "I'll never look at that the same again." This is an image that you may have in your home. It may be on the wall of your living room or your dining room. I see it in churches almost everywhere I go. You might even see it almost anywhere as you go to any business that sells paintings or portraits or home decor, and you might find this. And so I can't claim any originality to it, but I hope that you have a discipline and a habit or an idea of wherever you go. I believe God's speaking to us all the time in a lot of different ways through a lot of different people. We're going to be looking at someone who was actually a Renaissance painter back in Italy many, many hundreds of years ago. He's familiar to all of us. And as I said, this is a familiar object that we'll be looking at tonight. He had no intention at all of reproducing historically what Jesus and his disciples looked like at the Last Supper, the night that Jesus was arrested. He had a message. There was something he wanted to say. And I think it's very important. I would hope that everything that I portray, everything that I produce, every message I preach or lesson that I teach, every song that I sing, every speech that I give, or everything I do, even with the things I might do on social media, anything I might write or draw, that it would have a message that would point to Jesus like this does. The author or the creator of this object is not particularly known as a Christian figure, though he was a Catholic who did believe in Jesus. But as he presented this, it is obvious to me that perhaps he was more devout than maybe anybody gave him credit. Click that next slide there. I'm going to talk with you a few minutes tonight about Leonardo da Vinci. He was born in Milan, Italy on April 15th, 1452. He died on May 2nd, 1519. There are a number of representations of him. This was a self-portrait that probably when he was about my age, maybe about in his early 60s. Let's look. I want to show you the object that we'll be looking at tonight. This is Da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper. And this is actually a photograph of the way it appears today. Now, I understand from the caretakers and the people who see after this, that there's probably not one single original brush stroke of Da Vinci's left. This was done so many hundreds of years ago that it has had to be repaired. And people have, I think, very, very, very talented people over many hundreds of years have done their very best to try to reproduce this just exactly the way Leonardo painted it. But all the paint that he ever used is all gone. And every brush stroke has drifted away. You can see that it doesn't look a great deal like the painting that you may have on your wall. Or maybe you have a family Bible and it has the Last Supper, this very painting portrayed in that Bible. Probably what you and I see often as we go from place to place is a faithful reproduction. But it is in very poor shape. Let's look at the next slide, Andy. The Last Supper is easily one of the world's most iconic paintings. Its permanent home is in a convent in Milan, Italy. Da Vinci painted the religious work directly on the dining hall wall at the convent of Santa Maria del Gracia in 1495. Think of that, how long ago that was. He painted it right on the wall. Okay, show the next slide there. Now this is a priest. I don't know who he is, but he's standing beneath it. It's a lot larger than many people realize that it is. Terry and I got to see the Louvre Museum when we were in Paris a number of years ago, but we didn't get to go inside. I understand that one of Da Vinci's paintings is the centerpiece of that entire museum. It's the Mona Lisa. And I've seen pictures of that, but I've never been able to go inside. But I understand that the first reaction that most people have is that the Mona Lisa painting is very, very small. It's just a tiny painting. It's not very big at all. This is much bigger than most of us might have imagined. Just painted it on the wall. Something you have probably told your children and grandchildren never to do. And yet he got away with it. And very well. Let's look at the next slide. This is kind of the way it looks. There are many, many devout Christians and pilgrims who travel all the way to Milan just to see this painting. And, you know, I guess it's a matter of perspective. I suspect that all of our family and friends and loved ones will love us a lot more after we're dead. I know that holds true for me, maybe not for you, but it seems odd that you might look at a painting by Leonardo da Vinci and say, you know what this painting needs? A door. And so they obliterated the feet of Jesus and some of the other disciples there, and they needed a passageway there into another passageway into the meal hall or the food hall, the dining hall, and they cut a door, cutting away part of one of the most precious paintings that's ever been painted. I don't know who was on the Buildings and Grounds Committee of that church, but they probably should have checked with somebody before doing that. All right, show the next slide. Now this, even to the door, this is a reproduction. Someone who just painted that, trying their very best to reproduce this, not as a counterfeit, but as a faithful reproduction so that other people could enjoy it and so that they could, it's like taking a snapshot or a picture of it. There's no telling that one day that may have just completely crumbled off the wall. It's a wonder that it's made it through 2 world wars and other conflicts. But I want you to look at the painting in a way tonight because Leonardo da Vinci was trying to say some very important things. Obviously, Jesus and his disciples didn't eat the Last Supper at a table. They were reclining on their sides. They probably had some small platforms upon which the implements were placed for a meal, but the way they ate was lying down. They usually recline on one side, usually the left side propped up on an elbow, and they would reach out into the table, and everybody usually ate out of the same bowls, and each had their own cup. But Leonardo was not trying to say, this is what it looked like. As a matter of fact, I believe it was probably very, very different. In the upper room that they celebrated or observed their Passover meal in, probably very low ceiling, it was probably very dark with smoky oil lanterns and lamps all around, or wax candles that might have given them some light, much like this. But here's something I want to draw your attention to, just visually. I'm going to put the pointer. Can you see that pointer right there? I don't know if you've ever heard of 13 at dinner, but the reason today that we consider 13 to be an unlucky number is because they had 13 at dinner. I don't know how much you've been around in social circles, but any good hostess or a meal planner would make sure that there are never just 13 guests at any meal. As a matter of fact, Agatha Christie, the great English murder mystery writer, wrote a very famous murder mystery entitled 13 at Dinner. There were 13 people there, Jesus and his 12 disciples. Leonardo says that what he was capturing here was the very moment after Jesus made the statement, one of you will betray me. That night in the upper room, after they had finished the Passover meal, Jesus said, one of you one of you will betray me. So you can see the shock and the consternation and the uproar. It looks like Jesus just said something shocking and terrible and awful. Do you remember how they responded? What were they saying in response to what Jesus said? Is it I? Is it I? And that's something that they thought, maybe it was me. Maybe it was me. One of you will betray me. Now show that next slide. And you see from that panel up there in the roof that if you draw the line on that line and extend it, it comes down to Jesus' right cheek. Click the mouse again there, Andy. If you look at every one of those panels, you'll see that every one of those panels, if you draw a line that coincides with the lines of those panels, everything focuses on the face of Jesus. Click it again, Andy. Do you see this carpets on the wall here? There are 4 carpets on this side and 4 over here. If you draw a line that touches the top of all of those carpets and follow a straight line, it all comes down to Jesus, right to his face. Look down here on the floor. Do you see those floor tiles? Look at the lines that form each one of those floor tiles. Click that mouse again. You see there's the first one? Click it again. Now let that sink in for just a minute. Among artists and people who know such things, of course, I did not consider myself to be an artist or to be fluent in that world at all. I'm kind of like the person, I know what I like and I enjoy looking at art and I'm blessed by it. But this point right here on Jesus' face is called the vanishing point. The vanishing point. And this was not something that just happened coincidentally or something that just happened and all of a sudden someone said, hey, Leo, did you happen to notice that almost everything about this painting that you just painted points to Jesus? And Leonardo would probably say, hey, what about that? Wonder how things like that work out. No. Leonardo, no doubt, no question, is making a statement here. When I think about my life and what people see when they look at me and how I portray myself and how I present myself as a Christian, I could only hope that as many of the things in my life point to Jesus like this painting does. I believe it ought to be the goal of every Christian and a part of our discipline to make the things that are a part of your world, the things that are a part of your life, let them point to Jesus. When people look at us, that all of their attention always be pointed. Tell them your name. Tell them what you do. Maybe you have a song, a sermon, a message, a testimony. Maybe there's a hobby or a pastime, something you enjoy, something that interests you. Those things can be very important to get someone to look at you or to look in your direction. That's what happens with any preacher. He says, listen to this. There are a few times in the book of Acts that it says Paul motioned with his hand. He said, hey, come here. But his intention, even though he was saying, look at me, he was saying, listen to me. It didn't take very long when they looked at Paul the apostle and listened to what he had to say that he started telling them about Jesus. You and I should be like that too. We should be finding every way we possibly can to have a life that points to Jesus. Okay, let's look at the next slide. The disciples are 12, but they're grouped by Leonardo in groups of 3. 3 disciples here. These 3 seem to be together, and these 3 are together, and these 3. 3 is very important because this picture is not just of a man or a human being and his followers. It's about someone who was God. There's another 3 in here. Can you see it?
The windows behind him?
That's right. There are 3 windows right behind him. And so probably if you and I spent some time, and that's what if you have one of these paintings at home, you know, I can always tell how good a painting is this I've got in my home or in my Bible. How true is it to Leonardo's vision of what this should look like? If these lines line up like this and these threes are like this, and you can say, this artist knew what Leonardo was trying to say. You know, if Leonardo never communicated what he was trying to say to anybody else in the world except other artists who admired his work, then he had a wonderful Christian testimony. Let's click that again, Andy. Now, according to Leonardo's notes, this person right here on the end is Bartholomew. Does anybody know who he is called in the Gospel of John? Bartholomew. He was Nathaniel. Nathaniel. Then there's James, the son of Alphaeus. And then Andrew. What was Andrew's connection to somebody else in the disciple band?
Peter's brother.
That's right, Simon Peter's brother. All right, there's Judas. Right beside him is Simon Peter. And then the Apostle John, the apostle who Jesus loved. Over here is Thomas. Now, we have a nickname for him that he probably would never enjoy. What do we think when we think of Thomas? What do we call him? Doubting Thomas. But the Bible also says that he had a nickname that was his real nickname. You know, remember what that was?
Didymus.
Didymus, which means the twin. He had a twin brother or sister. So there's Thomas. There's James the Greater. Sometimes the other James is called James the Lesser, but anyway, this is just James the Greater. And then Philip. Over here is Matthew. We know that some of the disciples were fishermen. Peter and John and Andrew were fishermen. We don't know the same thing, but we do know about Matthew. What was his vocation?
Tax collector.
He was a tax collector. There's Thaddeus. He is sometimes called Jude or Judas. There's another Judas. And then Simon the Zealot. He was like a warrior. He was a guerrilla warfare. He was called a zealot. Zealots were people. To be zealous means to be enthusiastic or energetic about opposing Rome. He was probably someone who was always causing trouble. He probably joined the disciple band because he thought that maybe Jesus was going to help overthrow Rome. All right, click another slide there again, Andy. Right here is Thomas, and I've got his name highlighted right there. Didymus, Doubting Thomas. Click the next slide. Now this is kind of a close-up, and this is actually a close-up of another reproduction. It kind of looks unusual, but you see that Thomas is shown with his right hand and his finger extended. Now, Leonardo didn't have anything into his notes as to, maybe he was about to make a point or make a statement or ask a question. But most people who are familiar with Leonardo's work believe that it really just had something to do with his finger. That you ought to look at Thomas, and when you think of him, you ought to think, there's Thomas's finger. Well, why? Why do you think?
Well, when the Lord came back, he told Thomas, reach hither thy hand and put your finger into the wounds
That's right.
of my hands, and be not faithless but believers.
So that is very good, Randy, and it is thought that Thomas was always somebody who had to stick his finger in something or test it or taste it. He was always doubtful that he had to make his own. It was difficult for him to believe. And so Leonardo said, this is somebody who always needed to touch things. And he really couldn't believe by faith. He had to have a certain feeling.
Well, see, he wasn't there when Jesus first showed up to the disciples.
That's right. They probably all would have been in similar doubt, no doubt. But he's the one that got saddled with the Doubting Thomas nickname. All right, let's look at the next slide. Here's John, the disciple whom Jesus loved. I believe that the Apostle John was very young. He might have been around 13 or 14 or 15 years of age. I believe he was just a boy. I believe that's why he could go up to Calvary's cross when he was on the mount where Jesus at Golgotha when he was crucified. And I believe the only reason he could be safe from being apprehended, he was just a kid, and nobody paid him any mind. Show the next slide there. Now, about 8 or 10 years ago, a man named Dan Brown wrote a book about that picture right there in The Last Supper by Da Vinci. Does anybody know what the name of his novel was?
The Da Vinci Code.
The Da Vinci Code. And it was a fictional work. It's amazing that so many people who know very little about the Bible, this Dan Brown became a multimillionaire overnight. He sold so many millions of copies of his book, and Tom Hanks starred in a movie production of The Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown said, this is not John at all. Who is it?
Mary.
Mary Magdalene. This is a woman, Mary Magdalene. Now, I confess that the features on this person, probably in an attempt to make this person look youthful, they do look a little effeminate. But do you know what Dan Brown said was the absolute, complete, dead giveaway? Let me show you something. Can you see my hands up here like this? Put your hands together like that. Probably all of the men here, if you do that, your left thumb will be on top.
Yeah.
But if you're a woman, probably your right thumb on top. Now that's not a hard and fast rule. I'd be interested in knowing how your thumbs turned out. But if you look right there, his right thumb is on top. And according to Dan Brown, while that's just a dead giveaway, he is without a doubt, without a question, a woman. That he is Mary Magdalene. But in Leonardo da Vinci's notes, he named all these apostles and who they were. There's never any doubt or question, and it's just a flimsy plot device for establishing, but it is amazing. Now there are people all around the world, it's almost like a cult, who now worship Mary Magdalene as someone who had an affair with Jesus and actually bore his children. No, that's just John the Apostle. And let's look at the next slide. Here's Judas. Let's look at a close-up of him in the next slide. Now, how do we know that that's Judas apart from Leonardo's notes?
Well, he's got a bag of money.
Yeah, there's the money bag right there. He probably gripped it like that, like he was choking it every minute of the day. John tells us that he was a thief. Now, look at his face. What do you see peculiar about his face and the way it's presented? It's red. What did Jesus just say?
One of you will betray me.
One of you is going to betray me.
So it's like he's embarrassed.
Yeah. Don't you think that if you were the guilty party and you knew it, and you'd already made the deal, it had already been signed, sealed, delivered?
You'd be embarrassed.
That's right. Your blood would come to your face, and there wouldn't be any way in the world, unless you were just a tremendous actor, to prevent that. Now, here is something that I don't know is a part of your culture, or your raising, or part of your tradition, but whenever me and my family and friends get together, and if we're having a meal together, there's something we want to be very careful at the table not to do. Now, I'll put my feet on the table, and I might even let out a belch every once in a while, or even worse. But we're all, seems like it's ingrained in me anyway. Look at this right here.
Don't knock the salt over.
Yeah.
He's knocked the salt cellar over. That's right. They didn't have salt shakers. They had little bowls with salt in it. Now, we don't even know if there was any salt. There's certainly not any place for salt in the Seder. That's the Passover, the Jewish Passover. But Leonardo painted a salt cellar there. What are you supposed to do when you knock over the salt?
Grab a handful and throw it over your shoulder.
That's right. It's got to be your left shoulder, though. Don't throw it over your right, or you're doomed. That's pretty silly, huh? Well, 13 at dinner, and there's Judas, and he's flushed, and he's embarrassed. And he's already knocked the salt cellar over. Okay, we're almost done. Let's look at another one. Right behind Judas is Simon Peter. Now, I don't know how closely you've ever examined this, or how faithful a representation you might have in your home or in your Bible. But I want to show you a zoomed in shot here, and I want you're going to see something, maybe, that you've never seen before. Show the next slide. What is that right there?
A dagger.
It's a big,
Or a knife.
yeah. That's not a knife.
This
This is a knife. That is a wicked, that is not for carving the bread. Remember later on that night, Peter is going to take the high priest's servant's ear off. He's already ready. All he needs is just somebody, an excuse. Simon Peter's there right behind Judas, and he's got his hand on his hip, and you can see that's Peter's elbow. He's got a red kind of a wrap around, it goes around his shoulder and around his waist. So that right there is in his right hand. He's got a knife and he's ready. All right, next slide. Now let's look at Jesus himself. Show the next slide. Show the next slide. Now look at the whole table. Look at the whole table. What's missing?
No food on this plate.
Show the next slide, Andy. Look at it again. There are probably several peculiarities. It's certainly not set for a Passover meal. That's one thing. But that's not what Leonardo was trying to say. Show the next slide and click again. Click again. Click again.
The chalice.
Yeah.
Click again. I've looked at many portraits. All of these, none of these have been done by Leonardo. Many other artists throughout time and church history have portrayed what this may have looked like. Without an exception, they always show a special cup. Show the next slide, Andy. See? They're usually fancy and very elaborate. Again. But look here.
No drinking cup.
It's missing from the hand.
But look at his hand.
Seems like
Show the next slide. I enjoyed, when I began reading as a young boy, I was particularly enthralled by the legends of King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table. It was some of the first epic novels and fiction that I ever read. To read about King Arthur, Queen Guinevere, Sir Lancelot, and the Knights of the Round Table. There's not only the stories about King Arthur, but almost every kind of literature imaginable from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period. Pilgrims, devout Christians, even the Knights Templar themselves were all searching for what they called the Holy Grail. They believed that Mary Magdalene took the cup that had been used at the Last Supper, and she actually caught some of Jesus' blood while he was dying on the cross. It's just a myth. It's a story. It's not true. It's not in the Bible at all. But people have built entire belief systems and fantasies of legend and lore about the Holy Grail, that it might have great power, that it might also even grant health and healing and great success. But as we look, there are some very small, as a matter of fact, there are some glasses, which they probably didn't have in Jesus' day. They would have wooden cups. Next slide. This is the last slide. Let me tell you the story, and this is to close tonight, that is told. It's not told by Leonardo, but it is passed on down by people who knew him. Leonardo had just finished painting this magnificent painting that he would call The Last Supper. There was someone who was a great friend of his and one of his supporters, and someone who was one of his patrons. He wasn't paid to do this painting, and he wasn't doing it because of a commission by a patron. But he did have a patron that often commissioned much of Leonardo's work, and he helped pay a lot of Leonardo's bills and helped Leonardo eat. He was helpful. He supported him financially. He's a very wealthy, young Milanese businessman. And he brought him to see Leonardo's painting of the Last Supper. And clasped in Jesus' hand was a beautiful and ornate chalice, a cup that was beyond beauty. It was so meticulously painted, drawn and painted, that it almost seemed as if someone could reach out to the wall and take it in their own hand. As a matter of fact, when the patron came in and was looking at the marvelous painting, the very first words, Leonardo said, "Well, what do you think of my work?" The very first thing that his friend said was, "That chalice and the cup before the Lord is so mesmerizing, it looks so real, it's so dazzling, that it looks as if I could reach out and drink from it myself." Immediately, Leonardo went and took a stepladder, part of the scaffolding that he'd been using for touch-ups. He took his paint palette and a paintbrush, and he went up to the painting, and he took some paint, and he just painted it over completely. He just blotted the whole thing out, that whole area. He obliterated it to the shock of his friend. He didn't immediately draw what we see here. The first thing he did was just completely destroy the image of what we would think of as the Holy Grail. His friend was astounded. And he said, "Leonardo, why in the world did you do that? It was so magnificent." Leonardo is said to have said, "If that's the thing that you see most about this painting when you look at it, then it doesn't even deserve to be on the table." Leonardo said, "When people look at this, I want them to see one person above all else. I want them to see Jesus." I don't know if that's a true story or not. I've told it all my life. It sounds like a wonderful story, whether it happened or not, and it is in the spirit of this painting. Go ahead and bring up the lights, Andy. That is the last slide. If there is anything in your life, if there's anything in my life, and people are fascinated by it, and it's what their eyes are drawn to, it's what they want to praise you about or to show their partiality toward you about, it needs to go. Something that keeps people from looking at Jesus in your life and in mine. Something that distracts them. Something that misdirects their line of sight. Anything in my life, when people look at me and say, "You know, I see that in your life instead of Jesus," it needs to go. Remember what the writer of Hebrews said? He says, we're running a race. We're in a competition. We're supposed to be charging toward the finish line. He said, "Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us." He said, we need to get rid of things that keep us from running quickly and well. It's a part of our life. We're always picking things up. We're always adding things on. We're always bringing things into our life without first asking, "Lord, is this something you want to add to my life?" Well, as you go about your week this week, I hope that you will consciously look around. What is that painting trying to say? Is there anything about the Lord in that painting? What about that song? Is there anything about Jesus in that song? Is the Lord trying to speak to me through a sunset or a sunrise? Through a pastoral view? I believe that He's speaking to us. And He's using people. He's using things. There's all different kinds of ways that He wants to tell us something. This is somebody that maybe we studied in our class at school. Maybe we just see his paintings around and hang them on the wall. We don't really know much about them. But I hope the next time you see the Last Supper, that you'll think, here is someone trying to say, the only person in the world worth looking at is Jesus. All right? Do you have a word of testimony or a comment or anything that's on your heart and mind before we go tonight? Let me pray for you then as we go.